Have you ever asked yourself, who created God? It's a question that stops people in their tracks. After all, if everything has a cause, then shouldn't God have one too? This single question has sparked debates between philosophers, scientists, and theologians for centuries. Some claim it's an unanswerable paradox. Others use it to challenge the very idea of God. But what if the question itself is based on a misunderstanding? What if the answer is far more fascinating than you ever imagined? Here's the truth. Most people approach this question with the wrong assumption, that God is just another being within the universe, subject to the same rules as everything else. But what if he exists outside of those rules? Think about it. Time, space, and matter all had a beginning. Science confirms it. So, whatever caused them to exist must be beyond time, beyond space, beyond matter. The laws of physics, cause, and effect, even the very fabric of reality. None of these can limit the one who created them, and that changes everything. Because if God is truly eternal, then our entire understanding of existence needs a shift. This isn't just a question of philosophy or religion. It affects how we see the universe, our place in it, and even our own purpose. The answer to who created God doesn't just lead to an intellectual conclusion. It leads to a deeper, more profound realization about life itself. So, let's take this journey together. We'll break down the logic, the science, the philosophy, and the theology behind this question. And by the end, you might just see the world in a completely different way. Are you ready? The question, who created God, is one of those that makes people pause, wrinkle their brows, and either lean in with curiosity or scoff in dismissal. It's a question rooted in how humans process reality, through cause and effect. We see a tree and assume it came from a seed. We look at a building and know it had an architect. Everything around us seems to have an origin. So naturally we apply the same logic to God. But here's the twist. What if this question, despite its logic, is built on a flawed premise? Think about it. If every effect has a cause, then the chain must go back infinitely, right? But that creates a problem, a loop with no starting point. Imagine asking, who built the first hammer? If every hammer needed another hammer to shape it, then where did the first one come from? The question assumes a cycle that may not even apply to the nature of God. This is where philosophy and theology step in, offering insights that challenge our human way of thinking. It's easy to see why this question has sparked debates across centuries. Some argue that even the universe itself had to come from something, an initial uncaused cause. Others claim that perhaps God is just another link in an endless chain of creators. But this leads to another issue. If God had a creator, then what about that creator? And the one before that? If we keep going, we never actually solve the problem. We just push it back infinitely. At some point, there must be something or someone that simply is. So what does philosophy and theology have to say about this? They claim that God, by definition, isn't part of the cause and effect cycle at all. If that's true, then we've been asking the wrong question all along. Philosophy and theology tackle this question head-on, and their answer is bold. God is eternal and uncreated. Unlike everything in the material world, he doesn't need a cause, because he exists outside of time, space, and matter. This might sound abstract, but consider this. If God were created, he would be just another being within the universe, bound by the same limitations as everything else. And that wouldn't make him God, would it? A being that requires a creator isn't the ultimate being at all. This concept isn't just a random idea pulled from thin air. It's been a central belief for centuries. Thinkers like Aristotle and Aquinas called God the unmoved mover, the one who set everything into motion without needing to be moved himself. In theological terms, he is aseity, a fancy way of saying he exists by himself, depending on nothing. Imagine a candle that burns without ever running out of wax or fire. That's a tiny glimpse of what theologians mean when they say God is self-existent. But here's where most people struggle. The human mind is wired to think in beginnings and endings. We measure life in years, journeys in miles, and events in sequences. So trying to grasp something eternal, something with no starting point, is like trying to imagine a new color. It's possible, but it stretches our minds beyond their comfort zones. That's why many resist the idea and keep searching for an origin, even when the logic points to something uncreated. Yet, if God exists beyond our time-bound reality, then asking who created him is like asking what's north of the North Pole. It's simply the wrong question. But if he's eternal, then what does that mean for how we understand reality itself? The answer lies in the principle of causality. The principle of causality is a cornerstone of both science and philosophy. It tells us that everything that begins to exist must have a cause. If something has a starting point, then something else must have brought it into being. A painting has a painter. A song has a composer. The phone in your hand didn't just appear. It was designed, manufactured, and sold before reaching you. But here's the key distinction. This only applies to things that begin to exist. If something has no beginning, then it doesn't need a cause. That's where God stands apart from everything else. The universe had a beginning. Science confirms this with the Big Bang theory. That means the universe needs an external cause. But God, he has no beginning. Unlike the cosmos, which came into existence at a specific point in time, God exists outside of time itself. If he had a starting point, we'd have to ask what caused him. But since he is eternal, the question becomes irrelevant. He simply is. This is a tough concept because our entire experience is rooted in beginnings and causes. It's like explaining sight to someone who has always been blind. The framework to understand it just isn't there. But consider numbers. Does the number 1 have a creator? No. It exists conceptually as a fundamental truth, independent of when someone discovers it. God, in an even greater sense, exists as the necessary foundation for everything, not as something that was caused. So if God is eternal, that means his nature is unlike anything we know. And surprisingly, ancient texts and scriptures recognized this long before modern philosophy did. The idea of an eternal God isn't just a philosophical concept, it's deeply embedded in ancient scriptures. Take Exodus 3:14, where God reveals himself to Moses as, "I am who I am." That's not just a name, it's a declaration of self-existence. No beginning, no end, just being. Then there's Revelation 22:13, where he's called the Alpha and the Omega, the first and the last. These descriptions don't just suggest eternity, they proclaim it outright. Unlike everything else in creation, God doesn't progress through time. He is beyond it. This is a hard idea to grasp because we live inside time's boundaries. We celebrate birthdays, watch the clock, and mark history in past, present, and future. But imagine someone watching a parade from above. They see the beginning, middle, and end all at once. That's how God perceives time. He isn't waiting for the future to unfold like we are. He sees all of history as a completed reality. That's why prophecy and divine foreknowledge make sense. God isn't predicting the future. He already exists in it. If God is eternal, that also means his nature is unchanging. His love, justice, and power aren't evolving like human emotions or societal norms. Imagine a lighthouse standing firm as waves crash against it. That's the stability of an eternal being. This is why faith in God isn't like trusting human institutions, which rise and fall. His eternity means his promises are just as reliable today as they were thousands of years ago. But here's the big question. If God is eternal and uncaused, what does that say about the origin of everything else? Did the universe just pop into existence, or was there an eternal creator behind it? This is where the cosmological argument comes into play. The cosmological argument is one of the most powerful ideas supporting the existence of an eternal God. It starts with a simple premise. Everything that begins to exist has a cause. And here's where science and theology shake hands. Modern cosmology tells us the universe did have a beginning. The Big Bang theory, which is widely accepted in the scientific community, points to a moment when time, space, and matter came into existence. That means the universe is not eternal. And if it had a beginning, then something or someone had to cause it. Now here's where it gets interesting. Whatever caused the universe must exist outside of time, space, and matter. Otherwise, it would be part of the very thing it created. That means the cause must be timeless, immaterial, and incredibly powerful. Sounds familiar? That's exactly how God is described in philosophy and theology. Just as a painter exists outside of the painting he creates, God must exist beyond the universe he brought into being. And if he created time itself, he cannot be bound by it. Some skeptics argue that the universe could have created itself, but that's like saying a book wrote itself without an author. It defies logic. Others claim that maybe something else caused the universe. But then we're right back to the same problem. What caused that? If we keep tracing causes backward, we eventually need a starting point, an uncaused cause. This is why many philosophers and scientists, even those who aren't religious, acknowledge that something beyond the universe must exist. But this line of reasoning isn't just about logic, it's about definition. If a supreme being exists, then by definition, that being must be eternal. That's exactly what the ontological argument explores next. The ontological argument takes a different approach. Instead of looking at causes, it focuses on definitions. It argues that if God, by definition, is the greatest possible being, then he must exist. Why? Because a being that doesn't exist wouldn't be the greatest. Think about it. If you can conceive of a perfect, all-powerful, eternal God, but he only exists in your mind, then he's not truly the greatest being. The greatest possible being must exist in reality. Otherwise, something greater could be imagined. This might sound like mental gymnastics, but consider how we define other things. A triangle must have 3 sides. If it doesn't, it's not a triangle. In the same way, if God is truly infinite, then he must be eternal. A created God would be no God at all. He'd be just another being in the universe, subject to the same limitations as everything else. That's why asking, "Who created God?" misunderstands what God is. If he were created, he wouldn't be God. Philosophers like Anselm of Canterbury and René Descartes use this argument to show that God's existence isn't just possible, it's necessary. If an all-powerful, self-existent being could exist, then he must exist, because existence is a necessary part of ultimate greatness. It's like imagining the most valuable treasure. If it's not real, then it's not truly the most valuable. Is it? The greatest being must have all great qualities, including existence. But if this is true, then why do so many people think science and faith are in conflict? Could it be that modern discoveries actually support the idea of an eternal God, rather than contradicting it? Science and faith. Many believe that science and faith are at odds, but in reality, they often complement each other. The second law of thermodynamics tells us that the universe is running out of usable energy, which means it had to have a starting point. If the universe were eternal, energy would have been depleted an infinite time ago. The Big Bang theory, widely accepted in cosmology, confirms that the universe had a beginning, and anything with a beginning requires a cause, something outside of itself to bring it into existence. This aligns perfectly with the idea of an eternal God who exists outside of time and space. Even prominent scientists have acknowledged this tension. Albert Einstein, for example, initially resisted the idea of a universe with a beginning because it implied an external force. But when the evidence became undeniable, he called his previous assumption the biggest blunder of his career. Physicist Robert Jastrow, though an agnostic, admitted that science seems to point toward a supernatural cause. He famously said that scientists climbing the mountain of knowledge might one day find theologians sitting at the top, waiting for them. Faith, then, is not a rejection of science. It is an extension of it. Science can explain how things work, but it struggles to answer why they exist in the first place. It can analyze the mechanics of the universe, but it cannot explain what caused it to come into being. That's where theology and philosophy step in. The fact that the universe had a beginning aligns with the concept of an eternal, uncreated God, rather than challenging it. But what about the idea that the universe itself is God? Some claim that nature is divine and self-sufficient. However, when we analyze this claim, we run into a serious contradiction. Pantheism, the idea that the universe is God, might sound poetic, but it crumbles under logical scrutiny. If the universe itself were divine, then it would have to be self-existent and eternal. But as we've seen, the universe had a beginning. The Big Bang marks a clear starting point for time, space, and matter. If something begins to exist, it cannot be self-existent. That alone dismantles the idea that the universe is its own cause, or possesses divine nature. A self-creating universe is a contradiction. It would mean the universe had to exist before it existed to create itself. Another flaw in pantheism is its inconsistency with scientific laws. The second law of thermodynamics shows that the universe is running out of usable energy. If the universe were eternal, energy depletion would have already reached its endpoint. Instead, we see a system that had a starting point and is slowly wearing down, reinforcing the idea that it was caused rather than self-sustaining. An all-powerful, self-existent being wouldn't deteriorate over time. God does not age or wear out, but the universe clearly does. Moreover, if everything is God, then nothing truly is. Saying the universe is divine makes divinity meaningless. Does that mean both the galaxies and the bacteria on your kitchen counter are equally divine? If everything is sacred, then there's no distinction between the creator and creation. And if there's no distinction, then moral values, purpose, and even logic itself become meaningless. Without an objective source beyond the universe, we're left in a void of philosophical inconsistency. But if God is truly eternal and separate from creation, then his qualities must also be eternal. That means his love, justice, and purpose for humanity are not fleeting, they endure forever. And this brings us to a deeper question. What does an eternal God mean for us and our place in the universe? If God is eternal, then his attributes, love, justice, and purpose, must also be eternal. That changes everything. It means life is not a meaningless accident, but part of a greater plan. Many people struggle with the fear of insignificance, wondering if their actions truly matter. But if an eternal God created the universe with intention, then you are here for a reason. Your existence isn't random. It's woven into something far greater than what the eye can see. That realization alone shifts the way we perceive life, purpose, and even suffering. Think about it. If God's nature is unchanging, then his love is not conditional or temporary, it's everlasting. While human emotions fluctuate, divine love remains constant. That's why people throughout history have found strength in faith, even in the darkest moments. Whether it's someone overcoming addiction, facing loss, or searching for meaning, belief in an eternal God provides an anchor. It's not blind faith, It's trust in something that logic, philosophy, and even science point toward, a cause beyond the physical world. This also means that morality is not a human invention, but something deeply rooted in divine order. If God is the foundation of existence, then so is his moral law. Without an eternal standard, right and wrong would be nothing more than shifting opinions. But deep down, people know certain things are objectively right or wrong. Kindness is good, betrayal is bad. That sense of moral truth aligns with the idea of an unchanging creator who instilled purpose and justice into the fabric of reality. So, what does all of this mean for you? It means that the question, who created God, is not just a philosophical debate, it's a doorway to deeper understanding. And if God is truly eternal, then his plan for you is too. The next step is yours to take. Now that we've explored the idea of an eternal God and how this question challenges our very understanding of existence, it's time to ask yourself, what does this knowledge change for you? If God is beyond time, space, and creation, if he truly is the origin of everything, what does that mean for how you live your life? Does it change how you view purpose, love, or your own struggles? These aren't just abstract concepts. They are the foundation of how we live every single day. If you've gained insight into the eternal nature of God, you now have a profound understanding that can reshape your perspective on the universe, your place in it, and even your relationship with others. This truth isn't just meant to be learned, it's meant to be applied. How will it influence the decisions you make? How will it shape the way you engage with the world around you? This isn't just about intellectual knowledge, it's about transformation. So ask yourself, how are you going to live knowing that the creator of the universe, the one who has no beginning and no end, has a purpose for you? Does that thought spark hope, peace, or motivation to live with intention? Or maybe it challenges you to re-evaluate your beliefs, your actions, and the way you view your future. This is the moment where you get to decide. If this topic has intrigued, you opened your mind or deepened your understanding, there's so much more to explore. Keep diving into these questions, because they have the potential to not only change your mindset but your life. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. There's so much more to learn and discover on this journey of understanding.